Well, it's been a busy couple weeks. I finished up a well, or I got done working there. My boss called me a few days ago, and he wants me to move from working in West Virginia to working in Utah, which is where I worked last summer. If you go back in my videos from then, you'll see me working out there. I even took some videos of the rig out there. I really liked it out there. It was a much better environment. It was a much more interesting place. Work was a little bit more intense, but it's higher pay. I'm getting another raise. If things go well, I might get a 100% raise, which would be really good. Uh, so that'll be cool. It'll be kind of intense. Basically, the guy who's out there now, who he and I are the ones who started that program more than a year ago, he's moving on, and basically the oil company specifically asked that I come out there. So I fucking hate West Virginia in a lot of ways. Somebody has commented that it looks beautiful where I live. I don't live in West Virginia. That's just where I work. I live in Michigan. But anyway, I've had to come home and I've been very busy. I've had to buy a car. I bought a bed. I bought a new bookcase. My other one was cluttered, so I had to get an additional one. And it's still not quite enough, but there's a lot of videos I want to make, but I've just been way too busy. And the bad news is when I am in Utah, I am not able to upload videos. I usually can't even watch them except perhaps on my cell phone if the conditions are right. Sometimes the connection's enough and sometimes it's not. It's literally one of the most isolated areas in the lower 48 states. If you look on like a FedEx shipping schedule, they put how many days out. Uh, that area is in an island of the most in the lower 48. I mean, Alaska and Hawaii take more, but or Alaska does anyway. But it's a pretty isolated area. I really like it there. I lost like 25, 30 pounds when I worked there last time because there's really no fast food, and I was able to work out a lot. So I do like it out there. It is going to be fun, and it's going to be relatively shorter wells. I think each one will take about 18 days, which is shorter than I'm used to. But uh, I cannot upload videos except when I go to town, and I usually don't do that. So that's a bummer. So there's a couple videos I wanted to make, and I'm not gonna have the time because I'm flying out tomorrow. But I did want to make my questions video answers. So it's been about what 2 weeks, a week and a half. People ask questions that are going to be way too long. It's kind of a mix of personal ones and I guess I asked for that. So this one I got a PM. I didn't get very many PMs, but here's one of them. I was wondering if anarcho-capitalism I was wondering in anarcho-capitalism how are regulations set, like clean water and air, wages, commercial fishing, and what stops companies from becoming the next oligarchy. Basically, what sets regulations and pollution controls is the preferences of consumers. If consumers value clean air and clean water, then they have a vested interest in protecting those. They have an idea, they have their private property, and if someone is polluting that, the most obvious example and easiest to conceptualize is just straight up litter. If you own a farm or just a regular house and somebody comes by and just dumps their garbage, whether it's industrial or just personal waste, that is trespass. We call that trespassing. Butler Schaefer would just call that a trespass, and you would be totally justified in trying to stop them, in contracting someone else to try and stop them, and to seek damages, to go to the parties that were polluting and say you've caused damage to my property, you've basically assaulted my property, if not my person, and cease and desist, and also clean up your mess and pay me for my trouble. And since very few, and people like to say, well, look, some big companies, not they're going to be way bigger than that one person they pollute. Yeah, if they're a big company and they're causing a lot of pollution, then they're not just hurting one person. They could be hurting hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and so they can easily aggregate their resources to become very formidable. You look at something like I live in Michigan, so we have the Great Lakes. Lake Michigan, there are literally millions probably of property owners. And so if you were to pollute Lake Michigan, it wouldn't just be, oh, the big company versus the little homeowner. It would be an aggregation of an enormous basically society of people who together would have probably billions or trillions of dollars at their disposal. Billions certainly for litigation. And what's true for litter, it's true for water pollution. Obviously, water is even more vital. If someone's polluting, I mean, where I live now, everyone has their own well. Every house has a well drilled down because the water table's high enough. There's enough of it that it's pretty easy to do that. And if someone was to poison, I mean, it's figurative, but if literally poison the wells, that would be an enormous um, crime, and one that would be sought justice against. And they would have to come to terms. If they didn't, if they said, we're just this good, this is more generally related to polycentric legal order. But if they just said, we're just going to blow off your claims, you don't give a shit that we're polluting. If they are unwilling to settle in some kind of arbitration, then they're asking for escalation. And there aren't any companies in the world that can afford to have the fleets of their vehicles tires slashed, to have basically guerrilla warfare against them. There's none that can afford that. And so they have a huge incentive to come to the table and be like, okay, and this goes for air pollution, this goes for everything else. Now, this assumes that people value clean air, clean water. If they don't, then there won't be any. But since I don't, as far as I'm aware, everyone pretty much values this to at least a certain degree. What stops another oligopoly or oligarchy? Well, first of all, that assumes that the new oligarchy would be as bad or worse than the government. I think that's very unlikely. Uh, I mean, the government engages in mass homicide. It is corrupt. It engages in mass kleptocracy on a scale that no private criminals have ever even begun to approach that order of magnitude. So, just on utilitarian grounds, I don't think we can take it for granted that a new oligarchy would be worse. It'd probably be less dangerous and so probably better. Um, Second, without an ideology that enthrones people, it is very difficult, even in the short run, and approaching impossible in the long run, to rule people by force alone. You need to have some kind of ideological reason to be able to deal with people in a way other than the economic means. It's possible to deal with people for forever almost, is if you're making voluntary exchanges. If I'm offering a good or service to people and they value it enough to voluntarily pay for it, that situation can endure as long as I endure, as long as they endure, as long as we have something worth exchanging. If we are uh, engaging in political, uh, what Oppenheimer would call political exchanges, where they're unilateral, where I'm simply coercing and taking from one person, that's difficult to do in the short run, although not impossible. The longer you spread it out, the more difficult it becomes. And it's, again, maybe I'm a really tough guy, so maybe I can coerce one or two people, or maybe 10 people, or maybe I'm Rambo and I can coerce 100 people. But the bigger the sphere of people that I'm trying to coerce, the less ability I have to do that, absent some kind of ideological framework which makes the whole thing justifiable. So the potential scale, and this is what, ideology is not fixed. There's no genetics that says we have to ideologically accept states or anything. There might be some kind of vague paternalism in there or something, but that does not directly translate into statism, as much as states like to couch themselves in those terms, or at least they used to. I don't know how much they do anymore. Um, oligarchy. I think you'd still have it, but it would be on a much smaller scale and much less destructive. So that's that. Let's see. And okay. What do you think of voluntarist social conservatism? That is a role that I'm actually cast in a lot. I know I come across as conservative to a lot of people, especially in my personal life, but here on YouTube, and I've had some people have contacted me and said that I'm really good at um, coming off as conservative. I don't know why that is. I'm socially very libertarian. I'm not libertine by most standards. I guess there's some people who would say that I am, but um, conservatism is kind of a negatory philosophy. The idea that your political philosophy is I just want to preserve the past just doesn't, to me it just doesn't make sense, because the past is always changing because we're always adding to it, you know. So Social Security was a radical thing when it was introduced in the 30s, and so conservatives were against it. But now that it's established, it went from being this radical aberration to it's just normal. It's conservative. You know, they don't have, to the extent that they have consistent principles in conservatism, they're not being conservative. They're typically either being, if I'm going to give them credit, libertarian, or socialist. I mean, because a lot of the conservatives, what the mismatched, mutually exclusive policy positions that they have, some of them aren't bad and some of them are terrible, and it's just, it's more or less a random. I mean, I just was listening. Joe Sobran said conservatives love big government as long as it's shooting somebody. Uh, there's not that kind of old school minarchism, suspicion of the state's pretty rare. Uh, but people have a right to be socially conservative. I tend to be sympathetic. I'm not religious. I'm agnostic. Which I'm probably going to get heat for saying that, but that's how I define myself. People say that's not what that means. Whatever. I don't give a shit. That's how I call myself. Because if I say I'm an atheist, it makes it sound like I'm out there battling against theism, and I don't do that at all. I shy away from that. I don't even care about doing that. And by and large, I respect the freedom of association that is typically what defines church relationships and family relationships. And I was more socially conservative earlier, and I actually am receptive to ideas about the family. I think there's a lot to be said about a two-parent household, the nuclear family. I'm receptive to all that. I don't. I mean, I'm not saying that two gay guys can't raise kids or that two lesbians can't raise kids. As far as I'm aware, that doesn't seem to hurt kids at all. But single mother homes do seem to be really terrible, and I don't. There's not as many stats on single fathers because it's rarer. I know people who do it, but uh, I I don't know if it's just because that's where I'm coming from. And don't get me wrong, my parents are Democrats, so I didn't like grow up like in a socially conservative household. Although the area I'm from is sort of socially conservative. Let's see. What about feminism? Feminism, well, it says, how do you feel about the MRA movement? I don't know what that is, so I don't have a feeling about it. What about feminism? Feminism is just socialism by and large. It's stupid. It's collectivism also. They're hypocrites because they basically ignore Ayn Rand, which, if you're going to be a feminist and you're going to trumpet the successes of women, then she is, I mean, she's the most successful one, really, in many rubrics, even if you don't agree with her, and I don't agree with her on everything. It's just, to me, that's a shameful omission. Shows where their priorities really are. So I know there's libertarian feminists, and we aren't going to disagree, but by and large, I think the movement's stupid, and they hate men. And obviously, that I can't understand that, like, for the life of me. Okay, to what extent would you be able to handle yourself in a combat situation if the state tried to conquer your stateless society? That's a good question. Of course, that's very circumstantial. I am no Rambo. I don't have any martial arts training whatsoever, and I only have basic firearms skills, very basic. And I'm trying to work on that. That's developing skills like that is very time consuming and very difficult. And I have the excuse that I've been making money, and it's made that hard. And I'm getting to the point where, like, I need to start working both of those things. I'd like to start doing martial arts training of some degree. I'm such a novice at it that I wouldn't even know where to start. So if anyone has any great suggestions, and I'm thinking in terms of practical fighting, not, I mean, the other stuff is cool, and there's a lot of stuff that's real showy and stuff, and that would be interesting to do maybe. If anyone has any suggestions, I'd love to hear. Firearm situation, I have a pretty good idea what I need to do. There's enormous amounts of advice out there for that, even if you're not a libertarian. As it is, I talked to Boston Tea Party about it. There's an enormous literature about it. Actually, I just bought a couple new books about that sort of thing. Really, though, you can't learn that from books. I'm considering attending some of the firearms academies if I ever get the chance. There's several excellent ones out west, even in the Midwest. But in terms of resisting the government, that depends on the circumstances. If they send some Delta Force team, yeah, there's nothing I can do. If or very except perhaps flee. I mean, if I run away, they might not be able to find me. But uh, there's not enough Delta Forces to go out there for all the people who are at my level of interest and above, because I think the number of people at my level of interest and above would be numbered in the millions. And they don't have, I mean, even if, so if it was just like the local cop or whatever who eats donuts all the time, you've seen the local cops or sheriffs or whatever, who knows? I tend to think that it's a more likely scenario that there'll be some kind of very bad times and we'll have increased crime to the point of massive social unrest, and my firearms are much more likely to be used against opportunistic, ill-prepared neighbors than stormtroopers. But uh, I am equipped for both, at least in terms of material, not in terms of training yet. So that is something I'm working on, and I am happy to take suggestions. Uh, what are some of your favorite historical figures? You know, you get jaded. One I've always really liked is Vercingetorix or Vercingetorix. It depends for different pronunciations. Uh, and I don't know. There'd be so many other ones. It'd be hard. Uh, I don't typically just like the ones who are libertarians though. So I don't know. I'm not gonna name other ones. That would just take forever. Do you think the early modern Dutch Republic could be described as a libertarian society? Yes, I think the early Dutch Republic could be considered one of the most minarchist societies ever. They were very theological. They were theocrats, and so especially early on, basically had to be a Calvinist. I mean, they even banned Lutherans and Anabaptists, and well, they allowed some Anabaptistry, and definitely Catholics were prohibited for about the first 200 years of the Dutch Republic. That is an example of a society spontaneously rebelling. There is basically what they call the iconoclastic period. I think in 1572, where basically it is ostensibly ruled by Spain, by Catholics. It was ostensibly Catholic, but there had been a revolution where people were reading the Bible and were no longer thinking they should be Catholic. Eventually, some governors, for a long time, the Spanish kind of let it fly and say, okay, just we know what you really think, but just nominally support us, and we'll call it good. And eventually, there was a governor who said you have to not be heretics, and that didn't work out for the Spanish. There was a rebellion, and the Dutch broke away. Uh, a lot of times they are. It's weird. They've been kind of forgotten in the memory hole of history. Everyone's heard about England and France and Germany, and not many people have heard of the Dutch Republic, the Netherlands, Holland. Holland's just a single province within they're kind of synonymous as far as Americans are concerned. But yes, they have very free market, very high property rights. One of the first places where you saw private accumulations of capital to a large extent. You had joint stock companies also. A good example of militaries based on voluntary. Other than, I mean, the government's receiving tax money, which isn't voluntary, but they did not believe in conscription. They thought you had freedom of conscience, and so they induced people into the military by offering them pay. And I think the most dramatic example is in the Navy, because the Navy had an extremely high mortality rate. It was extremely difficult. Even if you never fought, you're on a ship, you could be killed in a storm. It's very hard labor, and they fought a series of wars with the English, who are known for having a powerful navy. The Dutch are pretty much the only state that historically has had any success against them, other than limited Japanese and German successes in the world wars. And it got to the point where they would offer extremely high wages for people to be sailors, and then they'd even have to start offering bounties for if you lost body parts. So if you lost an arm or a leg or a finger, you'd receive a large stipend, and then even if you died, they would give a large amount of money to your heir, usually a spouse or children. And it got to the point where, and the pay scale on ships differed. That the bottom was basically unskilled labor. At the top, you had your captains and that sort of thing. And by the end, even the bottom people were making more than highly skilled workers were on land. They were able to staff their fleet and have an effective fleet uh, without conscription. And the British, of course, did use conscription. There's a good book on it called the Oxford, uh, what is it? The Oxford Library published the Dutch Republic, its rise, fall, and greatness, something like that. It's 1,400 pages long. I read it a couple years ago. It's a neglected episode of libertarian. People will talk about Manchesterian England or early United States. That's a good example right there. And they did also. I mean, they did private land reclamation. Everyone knows that they're trying to fill in land. Basically, the price of land was so high that people were looking out at the ocean, being like, "Well, if we could somehow dredge this up, get rid of the water, we'd have an investment." And that was actually done privately. To get investors to say, "Okay, we're going to build a dike, and we're going to clear 500 acres, and you'll each get your plot." And same thing with shipping. Shipping was extremely capital intensive, especially back then. If you wanted a ship that could go all the way to the East Indies, which is where they ended up sending a lot of ships, what's today Indonesia, which for a long time was called the Dutch East Indies. A ship like that was extremely expensive and extremely risky. And of course, there were merchants who could afford to do it themselves. But what ended up happening is you would have stock companies where they divide up the shares, and first into 8, and then eventually you start having 164 and 200 shares and that sort of thing. So uh, yes, that's a worthwhile thing to look at. I wish Neil Sio would make videos about it. I don't know how much he knows about Dutch history, but he's from Holland, and I know I've chided him for being such an Anglophile. But I guess English is the language of libertarianism essentially, and so he doesn't. Would you gay marry Ryan Falk? No. I might gay hook up with Ryan Falk. I don't think he'd have me though. That we'd never get married. So I'm not that into him. He's a cute guy. He's a smart guy, but I think our personalities would clash. Which isn't to take away. It's just that's my opinion. What do you think about piracy, the digital kind? I don't believe in uh, intellectual property. Obviously, I guess you could make an argument if I have a computer and I put up it's got all my personal information on there about my bank accounts and stuff, and I put security on my computer, and someone hacks into it. I could say that's trespass. It's my computer. I put up security walls. You broke into it. Even if you did it digitally, I think you could make an argument for trespass in that scenario. But other than that, no, I don't really believe in that sort of piracy. How'd you get the dent in the hood of your truck? I made a very bad decision while driving. That is getting rectified also. I had to buy a new truck though. It still runs. I drove 1,000 miles with that dent in it, but it was embarrassing. I don't want to tell the whole story. Just it could have been worse. My head could have get chopped off, but whatever. What's your opinion of national anarchism? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. It sounds kind of oxymoronic. Uh, when are you going to find a nice young man, settle down, and start a family? That's a great question. I'm to the part of my life where I need to do that. So if there's any nice young men who see this and are interested, let me know. I mean, I won't lie. Part of the reason I started doing this was to try and meet guys, and I've met a couple, and they've been nice guys. But distance has been a huge problem. So we'll see. I don't know. I need to start doing that. I need to start having kids real soon. Despite my sexual preferences, I do feel a strong desire to spread my seed and then to indoctrinate them to be libertarians. Like I feel like that would be very satisfying and gratifying. I think I'd have cool kids. Like I like my gene pool. Like I think I look like I don't know. I'm very satisfied with my genetics, and I think as long as a woman wasn't a total douche, like I think my kids would be awesome, and I'd like to have a lot of them. Okay, what finally made you take the plunge from minarchism to anarchism? That's very simple. That would be an interview Scott Horton did with Hans Hermann Hoppe back in 2004 that I listened to maybe a year or two after it was recorded. There's more to that story, but I made a video how I became an anarchist, and you're welcome to watch that for more details. Also, you mentioned in some of your older videos a series of books commissioned. Oh, this is okay. Commissioned by the German government about Germany in World War II called Germany and the Second World War. Do you know what the equivalent books for the US and Soviet are called? I do not know. I know they exist because they're referenced in the first book of Germany in the Second World War. I mean, there's like 50 pages at the beginning of that book that just are talking about what's the genesis of this book, where it came from, and all that. Uh, that book about the German version came out in the 80s. Because there was such a stigma attached to World War II and in its aftermath. Well, in the immediate aftermath, fucking Germany was destroyed, and there was nobody going to be talking about publishing books like that when all the buildings were burned out and stuff. And then there was this great, I think, in hindsight now, overdone fear of communists taking over or whatever. They did not write the definitive history of World War II, which is something the United States and Russia did within at some point in the 50s at the latest. Um, my understanding is that those books are extremely voluminous. I think it said that in the United States they basically did two, one for each theater, and the one for the Pacific Theater was 159 volumes long. Maybe that's both of them put together, but I believe that's what it said. If that's true, um, and it was published in the 50s, good luck ever finding it, and you'll never be able to buy it. And I mean, I also read that the Soviet one is similarly lengthy, and also that it's usually considered just pure propaganda. But I wonder how much that wouldn't also be true of the American one. So I know that they're out there. They're probably got an enormous amount of information in them. They'd have to be that long. But I mean, the German ones are long. I mean, it's 10 volumes, and at least two of them are double volumes, so it's at least 12 volumes, and it could easily be 14 or 15. And they're big, they're 1,000-page books or more, and that's dwarfed by these Soviet ones. So, and the U.S. ones. I've never read them. I've never seen them. I've only read about them and only briefly, so I can't help you there. What are your thoughts on transhumanism and specifically libertarian transhumanism? I know there's a couple libertarians I know who I like a lot who are very much interested in transhumanism. Uh, G. Storyalov, a Russian immigrant to the United States who went to Hillsdale, who's got a good channel, is into that. There's a guy on Facebook who just friended me out of the blue. I don't think he has a YouTube channel, but he's a really good-looking guy, and he's into transhumanism and libertarianism, and I think the two are compatible, which is the next question. I mean, obviously, if someone becomes a transhumanist cyborg and they start coercing people, then that's not good. But I don't think that's a function of transhumanism. I think that's a function of there's all this dystopian science fiction about transhumanism and cyborgs and artificial intelligence, and I think all that stuff is potentially true, but it's also just potentially not true. So I think that technology enhancing humanity is neutral in terms of libertarianism, uh, at least as far as I can tell. Do you think technology will allow people to immeasurably transcend human limits? Yes. To what extent and how soon? That's a different question, the technical one that I don't know. Uh, in a lot of ways, we already have. We already live a lot longer than we used to, get taller, um, that sort of thing. Is more likely to set them free, or do you think it's more likely to elite? I think the elites would like this, but it's actually functionally very difficult because you're not going to be able to, the first synthetic, the first, say, animatronic arm, just for an example, isn't going to be vastly better than the a human biological arm. It's not going to give the possessor the power to just rule over everybody, and so it's only going to be many generations later, and I mean generations of the technology, not literal human generations. Uh, that you would have, it's not going to be the type A that's going to take over the world. It's going to be the type S. And the thing is, by the time you get to the type S, everyone else is going to have the type P's and O's and R's, and it won't. The advantage will be kind of negated, I think. I mean, it's a lot. In fiction, like in comic books, you always have these scenarios where a mad scientist like invents something that just augments them in some incomprehensibly advanced way. So you go from just a scientist to the Hulk, let's just say, and the Hulk is what, 1,000,000 times stronger than the average person. But yeah, I'm not saying technology doesn't have within it the ability to create someone augmented that much. I'm just saying, really, Bruce Banner would probably end up being 8% stronger, and then maybe eventually double as strong, and that's not going to give you the world. And by the time he developed something to make himself 10 times stronger, the rest of us would be double stronger. And it's very hard. The infrastructure necessary to develop that kind of technology is so broad based that it's really hard to have a monopoly on it. It is a danger, though. I'm not saying it. I'm not gonna say I'm not worried about it, because I do get worried about it. But I don't think it's inevitable. I don't think it's just a sure thing to be used against us. What do you think of the documentary The Age of Transitions? I don't think anything, because I've never seen it. And that is by Ivan the Heathen. Ivan the Heathen is very well read. He's corrected me several times. He's pretty much the only person who corrects me in my videos. And I don't know why he doesn't make videos, because it's not like we don't have. It's not like we have too many people making videos for libertarianism. So, uh, Ivan, if you see this, you should make videos. Okay, it's not a question exactly, but I would like to hear about the microeconomics of running a well and your thoughts of the future of fuel production in North America. Why? I don't. The microeconomics question, I'm not sure. That seems pretty broad, open-ended, and I don't know exactly how to answer that. In terms of fuel production in North America, there's a very large amount of hydrocarbons in North America, more than anybody knows, uh, probably more than anybody dreams. Pretty much anywhere you have sedimentary rocks, there is some hydrocarbons. Uh, that doesn't mean that it's economically sensible to get them, but uh, there's a lot. Someone else asked later about peak oil, so I'll talk about it when I read that. But that which of course not to imply by saying that they're not finite, because everything is finite. That's um, Do you work in the oil business? Thought you mentioned that in a vid. At any rate, how close do you think we are to peak oil? Also, this is the very next question. Yeah, people would say I work in the oil business. The different oil and natural gas is the same at the process of drilling. You basically you drill a well, you drill a hole in the ground. Now they drill them deep, and they have all these other things, and so that's actually, it sounds simple, but it takes a long time. And basically, my job is I make maps of those wells. As they drill, I look at the rocks that come out. I look at the data about how fast they're drilling, how much gas there is, how much oil there is, if there is any. Which, by the way, when I was in Utah, I saw oil, but pretty much every other job I've done has been natural gas, so I don't typically see much oil. Other than when they use it to drill, some oil rigs use oil to drill wells, and this summer that happened, and it's not fun because you get really dirty. So yes, I do. How close you are to think of peak oil? I think peak oil is a fallacious concept. Not and not the amount of oil is finite, 100%. But the way the economy works is, as something becomes more expensive, people look for alternatives, and then eventually it loses whatever role it was playing in society changes, and so uh, it's not a problem. Now, if the government makes that very difficult, if it doesn't allow you to experiment with new technologies and alternatives, it can retard that process, even totally stop that process, and that does worry me. But outside of that context, peak oil is not a huge issue. Uh, why do you drive the kind of truck that you drive? Because I needed a car when I started working, and I had no money, and so that was what was available. I had a relative basically bought it from a friend of his, and then I had to pay him back. It wasn't just given to me. But it was a truck that was already being used in the oil fields, so it was up to this task, basically, and I've had it ever since. If you had to die with others owing you money or die in debt, which one would you choose? I would much rather die a creditor than in debt. That way, any of my heirs would be entitled to what I was owed. It also gives you something to live for. I figured I think I would live longer if I knew that somebody owed me money, because I'd want it back. So I don't think there's any reason to die in debt. It's just silly. Debt's not intrinsically evil, but it's just, and this is, there's nothing morally wrong with going into debt, but just being personally, I just really don't like it. I do it now sometimes, kind of scientifically, like I'll go into a little bit, and then I always pay off my balance at the end of the month, so I don't pay any interest. It's just I don't demonstrate my creditworthiness, I suppose. Although that's a mute point when you actually have cash, which I'm getting to the point where I pretty much always do. Uh, which key points would you say you disagree most with Milton Friedman and your views on him in general? he's a mixed bag, most definitely on monetary policy and Fed policy. Other than that, the only things that he kind of talked about vouchers, which I thought was kind of stupid, and like if he ever talked about like medical savings accounts, that would be kind of stupid too. I don't know if he ever did, but in general, he's very poetic champion of free markets and freedom and that sort of thing. And um, I mean, on the one end, he agitated for the end of the draft, although it's kind of a faux end to the draft because he's still registered. But on the other end, he started tax withholding. So he is one of those figures that actually is mixed because most people it's like okay they're shit or they're pretty decent, and him it's like oh well there's some really decent really great stuff and there's some really shitty stuff too. On net I think he's positive though. So but the other thing is Mizesi and Rothbardians like we are I'm just always he's so overrated relative to them. It's just not fair. I'm not saying that he should be a nobody. He deserves all the fame he has. I think he deserves more fame than he has. I just think that Mises and Rothbard should have twice as much at least. So, how old were you when you committed your first murder? That is fallacy. That's assuming that I did that, and I never did, to my knowledge. What future technologies are you most looking forward to seeing, and why? Uh, it depends on what time frame we're looking at. I mean, obviously, like interstellar travel would be pretty amazing. It's something I would want. I think if we could ever get to that point, we'd always have this option of just leaving to another planet and colonizing it. Uh, we not, wouldn't really have to worry about the extinction of the species or anything until entropy death. But I don't even know if that's actually going to ever happen. In the near term, I just don't know. So I know what things I like to personally have, but and he talks about solar power. I don't know. I want to kind of get off the grid myself, but I don't know how much solar power is going to have to do with that. I don't live in an area where there's much sun. So, you have a lot of voluntarist friends? No. I have a few voluntarist friends, and I have quite a few other friends who are libertarian, who have joined that way. I do like to hang out. They keep changing their names. It's originally was a Young Americans for Liberty chapter at my local college here. I kind of feel like a pervert going there now because I'm like way older than all of them. I kind of mesh with college. I still look like a college kid, but I'm not. Uh, and they it very quickly just became the anarcho-capitalists on campus, and they're cool guys, and I do like to hang out with them when I'm home. This thing is I'm never home. Um, I'm at work almost all the time, so I don't get to hang out with any of my friends most of the time. It's really kind of sad. Are you quite open about your views, even the more controversial ones, or stay quiet in case of again? My view on this has been I'm never going to lie, so I'm never going to assent to something that I think is wrong. So if everyone's nodding their head about how great a war is or something, I'm not going to say yeah I agree too. I'm going to be like well, I'm pretty sure this is bullshit. Usually I will temper it a little bit and not just come out yeah we need anarchism, but I'll just be like well, he's a liar. I mean, it's pretty easy to call politicians liars, and it's pretty easy to criticize any policy they're talking about. You can be like, "Well, that policy's stupid," and you don't have to go into why all other policies are stupid all the time. There's no reason to fight every battle every time. There's no reason to fight the entire war for every battle. I guess maybe that's not a good analogy, but um, if you're going to have a debate, and this happens quite frequently, be watching the news with the family or friends, and there'll be something on there about gun control or the Obamacare or taxes or something. And it's so much easier to just be like, well, this policy is stupid. Here's the reasons why, and not try and sell the whole ANCAPism at that moment. You're turning a discussion or a little debate into a life-altering lecture series that could never be done in the circumstances you're talking about. So I don't lie if people say, well, because I've had people. One time we were talking about, I got in a debate with my parents about the city wanted to tax people to fund a library. Like there's a library and they wanted to, repair it because it's like 150 years old. And I was like, well, that's nice. I mean, don't get me wrong. You're not going to find anybody who likes books more than me. I spend almost, what, $200 or $300 a month this year on books, basically. uh, easily thousands of dollars a year. But I don't think all I said is we don't know how valuable something is if they're coerced. We know if people make a voluntary transaction that okay, they value what they got for the price that they paid, otherwise they wouldn't have done it. So there's a net social gain there. If something is based on taxes, we don't even like. Then that's not the case. We don't know that the people in our town are getting something that they really value. And my dad was like, well, that would mean that everything from taxes we don't know. And I was like, yeah, it would, and it does. And like, oh, so uh, unwarranted impression. You don't want to come across as a raving lunatic, but you don't have to talk about anarchism and sound like a raving lunatic. That's just something that takes practice and being articulate and knowledgeable, and to be able to uh, discuss ideas and not be crazy. And that's one problem, is just some people just get so melodramatic about it. And I know yeah, we're talking about the government killing people, so I understand, and it's easy to get wrapped up in that, but you're not doing anyone any favors if you just come across as a loon. So, what do you think of antinatalism? I wasn't sure what that was. There was a debate in the comments about it. Apparently, this is the policy of killing babies or aborting babies. It's like the one-child policy in China. Obviously, this is stupid. Uh, China is in this really awkward position now because they have all these boys and not enough girls. I heard there's like 100 million guys extra. Uh, which would be great, except not into Chinese guys. So that's terrible. I mean, for a government to be telling people to have abortions and whatever, I mean that that's either the worst thing they can do or just one slightly. It depends how you feel about abortion. If you think abortion is murder, then it's mass homicide and whatever, and it's terrible. If you think abortion is somehow well, if you think abortion's great, then I guess you might think it's a good policy. If you want to say that abortion's not murder and it's maybe manslaughter, uh, murder of a sub but near human, uh, it would be really bad. So uh, I think it's stupid then. I mean, if a person wants to not have kids, that's fine. But well, I'm against abortion, so I don't know if I can even agree with that. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. This always annoys the shit out of me when people debate with you about anarchism. They say something dumb like move to Somalia, and you want to turn back the clock 100 years. How do you respond? Well, of course, when they tell you to move Somalia, they're assuming the debate, like they're assuming that, uh, you know, that I mean, that depends on the context of how when they say that. If you're agitating like for lower taxes or to end, I think that's usually in the context of taxes because they say, "Go there, there's no taxes." Um, you could say, well, listen, I want my country to have, I want the United States to not have any taxes, so why don't you move to Somalia? I mean, like, uh, it's the whole love it or leave it fallacy. They're assuming that, I mean, if we're debating how our society should be, then for them to just say, well, it should be the way I want it, and so then you should just leave, then they're just assuming the argument. But we're arguing about how it should be, not how it is. And I also added, if you like the government and taxes so much, fucking move to North Korea. Or if that's too extreme, say, why don't you move to Sweden? If Sweden is like the paradise, why aren't all fucking Americans moving there? Have you looked at the immigration figures? Way more Swedes move to America than the other way around. Like, America is still all these socialist democracies that are so perfect or whatever, there are more of them move here than us move there. And if you think they've got it down, if you think Canada is so fucking awesome, why don't you move there? And a lot of Americans have moved to Canada. Usually it's for better reasons, like Canada isn't out butchering people in mass. So I can accept that, but I mean, I would just turn it around. I mean, that's a stupid argument. That person is full of bullshit, and I wouldn't. I mean, you can. I think you should make the right argument first. Be like, you're assuming the thing that you're debating. Then there are other problems like, well, Somalia has other differences between, it's like there's no taxes in Antarctica either, but I'd freeze to death. There's no taxes on the moon, but I'd die. And my blood would boil and then I'd freeze and the radiation would melt my skin. And, I mean, then if they like taxes so much, then, North Korea or China or whatever, going back 100 years again, I'd say, well, I want to go back to when the president couldn't just kill anyone he wanted without, without anything. I like to go back to where Congress, the president couldn't just go to war whenever he felt like it. Not to idealize when Congress could declare war, because that was abused horribly too, but it wouldn't be quite as bad. I like to where people, when there wasn't a huge class of people who were just on welfare all the time, to be lazy. When there wasn't high murder rates, but we still had military-style weapons over the counter, no questions asked. I mean, we yeah, there wasn't a perfect past, but we can draw things that were good in it that are gone now and say, well, are you against those? Are you for everything that has changed in the last 100 years? Probably not. Everybody you talk to is going to find something where like, well, maybe that wasn't so great. Maybe the Iraq War wasn't so great that I wouldn't go back 10 years and undo it. So that's just the non sequitur. I mean, whatever. What do you think about my? This is from Neil Co. Neil Co. I actually think when I first started subscribing to people, which is some time after I started using YouTube, I think we're the very first one I did. I subscribed to about 4 or 5 people right off the bat. I think you were one of them. This was way back in like 2005 or six. What do you think of my Austro-Libertarian communication playlist? I noticed some of your titles videos aren't the nicest, but otherwise you seem calm and collected. Actually, I tried to watch it just before I made this video, and something's fucked up with my internet, and it didn't let me. I don't know what the deal is. It gave me that 404 error message. I looked at them earlier. I don't know. I don't think I'd watched any of them. I'm sure they're fine. I'm kind of curious as to why you would ask me about those particular videos. Uh, so I'm sorry, I can't really answer that. How did you become a libertarian? I have a video, 2 videos actually, titled "How I Became an Anarchist," that would include in there how I became a libertarian. It's a long story. Everyone likes to hear those stories from people, and I don't know. To be real short, when I was 12, I read the Constitution, and I also heard about the massacre of the Branch Davidians by the federal government, which happened 2 years before that. But I watched a documentary about it, and basically I thought, okay, well, so the government's good. It can do all these good things, but apparently it can also do bad things, and so we should integrate that reality into how we assess how good it is. And over the years, I slowly looked at issue by issue on whether the government should be involved in this or that. The first big issue was gun control. And by the time I was in high school, I really, even though I didn't grow up with guns, I never touched a gun until I was in my 20s. I was like, government should not control guns at all. In fact, it's necessary for society for the whole prevention of tyranny idea, not the prevention of crime or hunting. Uh, the guns should be uninfringed. I mean, people should be able to buy machine guns, artillery, tanks, obviously assault weapons, handguns, revolvers, exploding bullets, whatever, poison arrows. Uh, and then in college, it kind of became a little bit more concrete thanks to a local cable commentator. There's a guy at a local channel. He was a minarchist, but he kind of crystallized my thinking on it a little bit more. And he referenced some people who I looked up, and eventually I ended up listening to two interviews on Scott Horton's show. So Scott Horton played a big role. One was Joe Sobran, who is now deceased, but was a very interesting and polemic guy. Robert Higgs, just to give you some idea of the gravitas. Robert Higgs wrote, when he died, I think in 2010, Robert Higgs wrote a really moving and eloquent obituary for him, basically. And Robert Higgs is somebody. He's the I think he's this the I mean the sauce just said he's the greatest living economic historian. That's probably true. And he had nothing but high praise for Joe Sobran. So, uh, question: what do you think of the piece "Anarcho-Capitalism Dissolves into City-States" by Paul Birch? Never read it. It was specifically about remittance competition. Never read it, so I don't know. The whole idea of city fathers, I don't think it really holds as much water as it used to, because the world is so integrated now that you could have somebody who owns most of the property in a certain area, and they're kind of like they own most of the businesses, and they're kind of like, even if we had a market society, they'd kind of be like the de facto head of in charge person of a town. But there would be business interests. There'd be people in the town who would have wealth outside the town. So merchants who are independently wealthy, whose power base, whose influence is not based in the town, who would be able to come in there and have influence, even though they're not the original people there. And I don't think some city father would really have the clout to prevent this. It wouldn't even be in his interest to turn away potential merchants. So I don't know if that's what he talks about at all. I apologize. I was going to look that up and I just didn't. So I'm sorry. Um, Matt Barrow asks, and he's a new YouTuber, so people should check out his channel, Matt Barrow, Barrow. Do you think the U.S. will experience hyperinflation? Do you have a timeline as to what you think will happen with the monetary system? Will you flee the country at some point? If so, where would you go? I'm considering Costa Rica. Should I go to Should I be going into medicine? Is that a bad idea at this point? Will the U.S. experience hyperinflation? I think there's a chance. I don't know how good, and it's also it depends what you mean by hyperinflation. Do you mean Weimar Republic money becomes worthless a million% a day, hundreds of trillions of dollars to buy an apple, or do you mean like because technically hyperinflation is anything over 10%? I think the chances that we see something over 10% is extremely high. The chances that we see, well, people, Weimar hyperinflation, the chances of that aren't low, but they're not high. I don't know. I put it at like 10 to 20% ish in the next 10 years. And that's to say it could happen in a couple months. I don't know. We're in a, Robert Higgs is correct. We're really in uncharted waters here. And he says people know that they think it's going to happen. He says based on what? The expansion of the monetary base that happened after in 2008 up till now is completely unprecedented. So I don't know what to expect. I think that the dictum, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, is pretty much always good advice. That's what I do. Uh, you want to have your gold and your silver and your lead and your steel and your food. And if nothing ever really bad happens, oh well, you'll have to eat the food that you bought, and you'll have to, go to target practice with your guns. Oh fucking well, and you'll still have the gold and silver, and they're either great savings or good investments depending on who you ask. So it's not like, oh shit, now I have a whole bunch of gold now. What am I gonna do? Like there's no hyperinflation. Oh, too bad. I mean, like it's not a. If the price goes down, and just make silverware out of it. I don't know what. So, would you flee the country? In certain circumstances, sure. I don't have. I have ideas where I'd like to go. Some of them are well known. Some of them are not. Where is totally that's not something someone else can tell you. There isn't a panacea place. There isn't an Ancapistan that anyone can mention. So if you speak Spanish and you really like it down there, I know people who are fucking in love with Costa Rica. I had a bisexual college roommate who is a medical doctor now, and he is he is smitten with Costa Rica, and so for him, this is like a no-brainer. But if you speak Chinese, or and you really like, I mean, maybe I don't know. Do you think going into medicine is a bad idea? I think you're going into what is about to become a totally government industry, and that fucking is just it's annoying. I wouldn't want to do it because you become the medical industry is on the way to becoming just one giant bureaucracy, and that means you'll have steady living, but it's not very fun. See, this is what I don't like. I have this short question here, and it's like, oh, this is going to be forever. What are your thoughts on seasteading? Thank you, The Sauce, for asking such a simple question. I think it's a good idea. I want people to try it. I support it. I don't think it's a silver bullet. I think that Patrick Freeman's article, I know he's not directly involved. I know he's doing the Free City thing in Honduras right now, but I know he still supports it. He wrote an article in 2009 about how, well, arguments are never going to convince people. We have to have examples. I'm like, well, we already have examples. There's already East and West Germany, North and South Korea, and the USSA and the USSR, and and so just even if everything happened right for seasteading and they opened up a floating island and it worked really well, it's not going to convince everybody because there's always going to be some bullshit excuse like, oh, sure, if you have a little island and the only people who live there are Peter Thiel and Patrick Freeman and Mark Zuckerberg and a couple hardworking libertarians, and yeah, it's going to be real nice, but how's it going to work for everybody? I don't think that it's a silver bullet. I also think that the more and more successful it becomes, the more likely a state will intervene to do something about it. The only way I think it would practically work is if it did so on the